I would rather crash and burn than pivot to just sort of focusing on the security audience. In that, like, I don't want to build just another slightly better mousetrap. I want to build something that matters.
Guy, I am so excited for this. I remember we first did a SaaStr show many years ago. We get to do this in person now. I've known you for many years, so thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having me on. Always a pleasure.
I want to start today with a little bit of context. So how did you make your way into the world of startups? So most importantly, how did you come to found Snyk?
So I've sort of been working in startups throughout my professional career. I was in the sort of the cyber parts of the Israeli army, did that for about 4.5 years, and then went into a startup in the AppSec space that got acquired by another startup that got acquired by IBM. I moved to Canada in the process. I'm Israeli, sort of moved to Canada in the process. Left IBM to found a web performance startup, a company that's sort of more in the DevOps space, making websites faster. And so at that point, I kind of had shy of a decade of sort of application security experience, trying to get people to appreciate that it matters, trying to shift left, get developers to embrace it. Leaving them, got my entrepreneurial of founding startups experience going with Blaze, which ran for about 2.5 years, maybe in and around that, and sold that to Akamai, where I was CTO for about sort of 3.5 years and moved with them to London. So that's kind of my life story in short. And during the sort of the Blaze days, the performance days, I was part of the first wave of DevOps and sort of the first kind of seminal presentations at Velocity and such about how it sort of is different than the waterfall approach and the cultural revolution that came with that. And so Snyk was basically, once I was ready to leave Akamai and found another startup, Snyk was a bit of the culmination of those journeys. It was about bringing kind of the DevOps ethos and a lot of my sort of learning, doing angel investing and from the first startup and all of that into the world of security and application security.
I told you we go off script, but I'm too interested. I had Sim actually recommended that I ask this one. I think it was, he said, you obviously spent time in the Israeli military, and I think it's 82-100. Yeah. He said, and I used to have the same question, there is an unparalleled amount of very successful entrepreneurs who come out of this unit from the Israeli army. What do you think it is that breeds this level of success of entrepreneur within this kind of concentrated group of people?
Yeah, I think, there's probably a lot of aspects to it. I'd say at the core, in Israel, thinking outside the box is the default. And so in general, in Israel, there's an element of lack of respect to the status quo and kind of willingness to try things out. So I think that's the starting point. And I think what the army does is it's very good at filtering a select group of people that have certain aptitudes, specifically maybe, technical depth or sort of initiative, and bring them together and put them in a high intensity sort of surrounding. And you learn that everything is possible in that surrounding because there is a task to do and you have a bunch of like high caliber individuals around you and it needs to get done. There isn't really the option of not doing it. So you bang your head against the wall and you do it enough time, you learn that sometimes you break the wall and you just sort of get a little bit in that habit. And then once that's sort of kind of conditioning maybe happens, they end up acting a little bit like the Ivy Leagues in sort of the US, in which someone got out of the army a couple of years before you, they go off, they reach out, you have this diploma of ability, of potential, from the army and some mileage, and they pull you out. And so I think that creates a certain network. And in that network, there's this sort of sense of there is no problem that is impossible. It does have its negativity. I mean, Israel is not great in, the army has all sorts of negativities on its own, but also from a tech perspective, Israel is really good at tech. It's not as good in product. You sort of notice a lot more technology-driven products. And at Snyk, for instance, we started it in Tel Aviv and in London. And in Tel Aviv, I had, this anything is possible, fearlessness, sort of tech depth, security depth. And in London, I had kind of, product discipline, dev thought leadership. It's amazing how little open source leadership comes out of Israel, despite the sort of the huge kind of wealth of technology creation that happens there.
Why is that as well? Because you mentioned that kind of the constantly thinking out of the box being inherent to kind of the Israeli mindset, and open source very much aligns with that in terms of kind of community and anti-establishment.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's probably like slightly more technical aspects of just like language and maybe days of work or things like that. But I think more than that, it really is about the things that are sort of natural in your sort of environment, And I think actually the open source community is quite finicky. It needs to be very courteous in certain areas. You have to sort of really be mindful of one another and collaborate and sort of do that in a patient fashion, which, Israelis are not well known for, not always the case. But also,
haven't come across that in many Israelis.
Well, I think Israelis they say it like it is, on average. Of course, I'm stereotyping, but when I moved to Canada, I was saying that I'm a very polite Israeli or very assertive Canadian. It really depends on what your sort of benchmark is.
You also said a line there in particular. You said, at this point, I had like 10 years of experience, and you said about kind of the multiple founding journeys before Sneak. I had a guest on the show the other day that said about serial entrepreneurship being overrated. I thought it was an interesting statement. Do you agree with that? Or do you actually think that's complete bullshit and there is so much value to be had from the serial entrepreneurship?
I actually think entrepreneurship is a profession. So I'm maybe I'm on the opposite side of that spectrum, for that comment. I think there are some things that you only learn by being an entrepreneur. So if you want to, fundraising is probably the most obvious one, but also just the initial journey of finding product market fit. Starting from a blank slate is just not something that typically is a reality, in any other surrounding. Getting the first hires and figuring out how to do it, convincing people to join you in that first, the number of people that turned me down, definitely in Blaze and even in Sneak, is unpleasant. And so I think there's some things that you learn there. But also, I think what happens is that, I like to say that, if you're comfortable, you're not growing, and there's like a Freud better statement that says there's no growth without pain. And I think, startups are mightily uncomfortable. You're sort of throwing yourself in a surrounding in which you need to learn things very quickly, figure it out, run around. And so I think when you immerse yourself in a space, you build a certain perspective. Like when you found a company, you learn a ton very, very quickly. I feel like for me, for instance, my knowledge of DevOps is much deeper than probably it would have been because I founded a company in the performance space, in the DevOps space, versus if I had worked, in that type of surrounding.
And I totally agree, and I get you. You mentioned that kind of you have to get good at fundraising. Do you believe that the founder has to fundamentally embrace and be brilliant at fundraising as founder and CEO? I was on a panel the other day, and they were like, "No, you don't. That's not a core job. It's about building the business." And I said, "That's bullshit. Fundraising is part of building the business."
Well, only if you want money. I think it's hard to sort of think about how it's not a competency. It shouldn't. If you're an investor and you primarily invest in people who are good at fundraising, that's going to be a fairly short-lived strategy. You want to prioritize company building, product building, business building abilities. But if you cannot raise money, then the company cannot survive. The whole idea of the growth industry is you raise money. But also raising money, I like selling and I don't like deal making. I love getting people to fall in love with an idea that I have, with a concept, with something I'm building, with a perspective I have. And so that's selling. That's really getting someone to sort of believe the promise, believe the potential, believe in you. And I think that's very exciting. I separate that from the sort of the deal making, the sort of, okay, and how much are you going to pay for this? What is the, and I think that aspect, maybe, you can actually be a very successful founder and not be very good at it. You might be leaving some percentages on the table. But I think if you're not good at selling, if you can't get your idea through, if you can't, empathize enough with someone looking at the market and kind of, get your message through, I just don't think you're going to be good at kind of building the company, unless maybe you can hire someone to do that for you. But that's, probably more co-founder than employee in that case.
What do you think makes you good at selling?
Well, I guess I would say that my kind of core skills revolve around the combination of empathy and analysis. I have, deep empathy, to people around. I find people interesting, and I think I'm a good communicator. I kind of phrase things well, but that also comes back to understanding what people might want to hear. And then I'm analytical by nature. I'm an architect. I break things down into components, into pieces. I see that the world is that everything is a product, everything is an architecture.
It's interesting because you're kind of this strange unicorn though, which is like the blending of art and science, I think. Do you know what I mean? Which is you're deeply rigorous, analytical, engineering focused, which is obviously the science, but then you have the ability to be creative and communicate and tell a story and excite, which to me is more of the art.
Yeah.
And the annoying thing for me is there's very few people like that, and I'm not an investor in Sneak.
I think, thank you. And I do think that, different people have different strengths. I am good at math, but I'm not anywhere near best at math. I'm sort of reasonable there, but I can probably communicate mathematical ideas, better than others. I'm, I think, a pretty good programmer. There are probably far better programmers than I am, software developers. But, I understand what needs to be built maybe a little bit better, and I communicate what has been built better. And so I think, you lean into that sort of core center. And also for me, it's just more interesting. I don't like doing one thing and sort of mastering it. Apple has the whole rock star versus superstar approach, right? It sort of talks about some people want to be rock stars. They want to be, amazing at one thing, and they want to get better and better at it. They're your rocks. They're sort of your foundation. And then some people want to be sort of superstars. They want to be, they want to have more and more impact. They want to have more and more reach. And I've never related to the rock star. I'd like, you can kind of make your judgment on the sort of the superstar kind of achievement, but that is my interest area. That's what draws me, is to have greater impact. And so many things interest me, and that's where I get drawn.
It's interesting. You said about one word there, perspective, and selling your perspective, because I spoke to so many people, from Tom Hume to Ed Sim to many others, and they all said that you have the ability to see around corners like no one else. And my question is, how do you create a framework, or how do you allow yourself to continuously see around corners, or put yourself in a position to see the future before other people do?
Yeah, I think
it's a really hard question.
I think so. Some of it might be sort of a certain aptitude, but I do have, maybe running a company and sort of building the labs team, and we have some amazing people there, have actually forced me to sort of try and distill some of these into methodologies. I think the key elements are, first of all, I think about the world. I try to sort of break things down into first principles, not just I see that X is happening, but rather, why is this happening? Why is whatever DevOps disruptive to security? Like, what are sort of the fundamentals? You break it down, you get down. So, well, it predicates around independent teams. Okay, so it's independent teams are kind of at the core of this sort of agile development approach. So how do you do security in agile? So you end up, if you break it down into sort of the core principles, then you can now try to relate them to needs or to where you think has legs to sort of evolve and where not. And so I try to sort of break those down. The other thing that happens when you break it down is that you can grow your thinking. I have this amazing guy leading our labs team at Snyk, Miki, and he's incredible, and he can hold so much complexity in his head. And we had this conversation about how, like, even if you can hold a ton of complexity in your head, it's still limited, even the best people around it. But when you think about a topic and you reduce it down into these sort of core principles, like you sort of say, okay, DevOps, builds on, blamelessness, continuous processes, and independent teams. Now, even you yourself cannot bother yourself with all the sort of the mess that is behind those statements, and you can build on top of that. So you can build bigger and bigger pictures, building on those components. And sure, you'd be able to drill down into one of these tracks a bit more than maybe someone who just hears those principles. But I think it allows you to think bigger if you kind of codify the world that way. I think the other piece that's very important to it, though, is that once you do that, you need to get into the habit of anchoring in the future. And so, for instance, I love to ask, our product managers and sort of, angel investments that I make, this capability you're building, in 5 years' time, would it be more or less necessary in the world? And why? Why do you think that is? And so
just digging in on that, is there a right answer to that? And how do you analyze the different variants of responses?
First, it really starts by asking the question, but it tries to sort of kind of step away a little bit from being stuck with something that is exciting to you to do today, but you're really just plugging a hole versus solving a systemic problem. Sometimes the fact that something will be less relevant in 5 years' time, it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. It just means that you should invest appropriately. It might mean that it's okay to put something a bit more tactical about how you address it. It might mean you shouldn't rely on that as your growth vehicle. And when you're founding a company, if the answer to the core value proposition that you have isn't yes, if you can't kind of rationalize why it is more needed in 5 years' time, you should pick a different idea, because you wouldn't be at any sort of scale if you're just starting in 5 years' time. That's when your idea should be most needed.
To what extent do you think you can actually say, and I know that sounds strange, but bluntly, the hardest thing I think about investing in AI today is the speed of evolution. I'm kind of bluntly betting on great people who are directionally right because it's moving so fast. To the extent that you can say 5 years time will be more or less necessary, I mean, who knows?
Yeah, I think it's very hard. AI is especially kind of disruptive at the moment, and I do think that there's, AI as a whole will totally dominate the world. Specifically, there's a certain kind of a honeymoon period happening with GPT and LLMs, which I think will find the right limits to it. I don't really know them. I think typically if you're immersed in a space, if you come from a space and if you sort of, have sufficient sort of ability in it, you can you can kind of roughly get market timing within a plus minus 2 years time horizon. That's kind of my mental model. Now, plus minus 2 years is like life and death for a for a startup, and so you have to navigate the journey. And I guess again, kind of my system over here is not so much to sort of perfectly line it. I mean, there is a certain, like, you're making a bet. You're sort of saying, I think this is necessary. You've asked the question about whether it'll be more necessary moving forward. You have a thesis about your sort of theory of change and how you would do it. And then I try to apply this sort of big vision, small steps type lenses. And so big vision, and you have to be working towards something that matters at the destination, but it has to be sort of a sequence of steps towards it. And ideally, you don't regret taking any of those steps. If they take longer, if you get stuck in them and sort of, for a couple of years, you don't regret taking that step. And so you try to figure out the destination, figure, of course, your upcoming step, have a sense of what the next step would be. You don't really know past that, and you get going. And so if you get stuck, you still have something that you've built that is of value, and you continue. And sometimes you find yourself on a different path, and maybe that's okay and maybe not.
You said 2 words, kind of a series of them, but you said drill down and market size. When we drill down on the market size of Sneak, when Sneak was founded, this was a very, very small segment. In any traditional venture fund, you would say, the market size is too small. How would you advise founders who are building for initially very small markets, and especially here that?
People have a lot of sort of cynicism around sort of a market size. I think you have to separate between the existingly defined sort of market sizes as what Gartner at the time said about, application security market size. Those are transitory. I mean, those would change over time, and I think they're not important. You shouldn't make decisions based on those. They change. They have been proven to change over time. I think the second is the market size as actual kind of value proposition that you think you can deliver the world. How many people would need this? How much value you're providing? And I think for me, Sneak, I never had any doubt about the market sizes there. It's, we're helping make software development secure, and the value proposition is the multiple of sort of the number of developers or the size of software development and the sort of the importance of security. Both of those will just continue, and the multiple is huge. And so, I kind of had conviction it was never a bother. What I do think is important for founders to appreciate is when you talk to an investor, like it or not, the investor is going to need to have a market size in their investment thesis. It is very important. You can't be big, you can't be bigger than your market. It has to be proportional. And so you have two options. You can kind of ignore the TAM conversation and hope that your investor, figures something out kind of that, matches your needs. Or you can actually try to sort of walk them through it and think about it and explain why you think the market is big. And so I don't think kind of blazing it away, is the right approach.
But I think you can use it as an advantage to show your depth and analysis of thought around market evolution as well. I hate it when people say security market's 2 trillion, and you're like, okay, but the security market is actually heavily segmented and it's actually incredibly broad. Yeah. Can we segment it, show growth within different segments and show how we think it changes it? Do you see what I mean? That's how the best.
I do. And I think especially in early stages, or when you're talking about the idea, you don't know how the market exactly would evolve. You have to focus on value. You have to, and that within that value, you have to sort of size it. Okay, how many dollars do people typically pay, for that type of value? Like there has to be a dollar component to it, but you have to start from just sort of magnitude of value that you provide, and then the dollars, go from there.
I've changed my perspective a little bit on how I prioritize what I look for in companies. I used to be like, amazing founder, that amazing founders find great markets. It's just about the founder. And actually, the beach that you're surfing on matters a lot. Consumer ed tech, really hard business to be in, no matter how good you are. Like, how much centrality do you put on market versus founder, actually?
Well, I think it is very important that, in the world of dev, for instance, actually, I'll give you the example from Blaze. When I started Blaze, what I did was I went from the world of application security that had deeper application analysis technology, than probably any other industry. And I said, well, where else can that expertise that I have be applied? One of the compelling areas was, the world of QA, of sort of quality assurance, and thought about it. So, well, can I find quality problems, not just security problems? So, yeah, I absolutely can. But nobody's paying anything in the world of QA. Like there is, from a business perspective, it was not at all compelling. And as I thought more about it, I got to web performance and making websites faster, and says, okay, there's an industry that builds that. today, when you look at Snyk, Snyk solves security problems, and it does, on sort of software and finds security problems, and there is a real market, there's real dollars being spent. Now, from this point, we can provide additional value, and we already do it in a variety of ways by expanding into quality and so saying, okay, look, I'll also find quality problems, but as a standalone market, it doesn't really work. And so I think it's okay to factor it in sort of the future vision and sort of the breadth, things that are sort of maybe not amazing markets, but you have to like feed yourself on something where money is actually being spent, or where you have a good theory of why money will be spent on soon.
We mentioned kind of the initially small market that you served in the early days. How important is being first to market, do you think?
I think first to market is poorly defined. Like what is first to market? Was Snyk first to market? Snyk wasn't first to the AppSec market. It was very, very well established. I was part of the players, in the AppSec market, in back in the early 2000s. And so I think it's not well defined. I think what does matter is being a leader in a market and having some gap. And to do that, you have to have something that is differentiated in an area that matters. If you're doing something that's a little bit more wild, a little bit more different, so if you're first to market with that approach and you successfully execute on it and kind of win some order, then you have differentiation. And being differentiated in a market, that matters. And so it really is just about leadership and about differentiation more than about time. Being first to market is just one way sometimes to achieve that.
You said differentiation there. Messaging is a great way to differentiate the way you tell the world of your story. You said before, use messaging as a way to build the right product. What did you mean by that, Guy?
So messaging really forces you to distill what you do into kind of customer need. And I find way too often what companies, what founders do is they come from like a very narrow thing. I'll be amazing at this, whatever sort of, open source library that does, codifies whatever X's code, and something, and it'll be superb. But they love the technology or AI or crypto or whatever, and they don't sort of translate that into sort of a customer need. And on the flip side, you see people saying, I'll be a platform. I just had a conversation with actually an investment of mine that started by saying, we are the most flexible platform for, this and this and finance. We're in beta. I said, well, like that just does not work, And so I think what messaging does is it helps you.
Why does that not work for people who don't understand that?
Well, it's because you basically underappreciate. On one hand, if you're sort of too narrow, that you have to expand it to the use case, to the need of the customer, and understand their experience end to end. And sometimes, even if you only provide a portion of it, they don't have a solution for all the rest of it, and you're not going to succeed. So you have to think about their entire use case. What is the value proposition that you want to offer them? What is the problem that you want to solve? And similarly, from the platform perspective, people underappreciate the complexity. But once again, they think that they care about their tech. They care about how we'll build that. And my favorite sort of statement to tell founders is nobody cares about your product. They care about the problem that you're solving for them. And so why are you talking about your product all the time? Like you should really lead with what is the pain, what is the problem that you're approaching. And so messaging is a forcing function to, first of all, understand what is the value proposition that you have. What is it that you are doing for a customer? It has natural brevity constraints, like it has to be short. And so you have to distill it. You can say, I do this and this and this and this and this. You don't need to be kind of a messaging expert to know that doesn't work. And so you have to naturally prioritize. It's a great forcing function. And once you do that, I think people perceive messaging as, I already know what I'm doing, and now I'm just dumbing it down or sort of simplifying it for the world. But it's not. You're actually simplifying it for yourself. You are focusing yourself. If you know that you are solving a problem, like for a user, you'll end up building a different product. I can give an example from Snyk. So Snyk's ethos was always, developer first security. That was first. That was sort of who we are. And then open source security was our sort of, the first product to market. And both were needed for us to be able to succeed in the market. But the ordering of them was very important. The primary problem we're sort of addressing for companies is that developers were not embracing their security solution. And so that was the problem. And our thesis was always like, it started from use open source, stay secure. And it evolved minimally to develop fast, stay secure, which was the core. But it always focuses on like the thing that you want to do as an organization. And then how do we help you address it?
How often should it change?
Well, I think messaging naturally evolves. There's just the practicality of getting better at saying the same thing, and so if you find yourself being on a call and saying, well, I like phrasing it this way, although on the website I say that way, maybe you should change what's on the website. The second thing that happens is your product evolves, and so your value proposition, starts from something a bit maybe more narrow, maybe it shifted, maybe it expanded, and so your sort of messaging evolves. So for instance, for Snyk, going indeed from, use open source, stay secure, to develop fast, stay secure, the messaging evolves. But then also the market evolves and changes, and that's maybe over a longer horizon. I think a good example of that, again, in sort of Snyk world is at the beginning of it, we had to convince people that they should engage developers, that developers can and will own security. And today, I think a lot of that is sort of accepted. And now the conversation and therefore the messaging, the problem they have is more, well, how do I do that? How do I scale that? And so the messaging has to adapt.
The challenge, and the biggest challenge I see, is one of kind of horizontal product marketing or messaging, which is when you are a Notion, when you are a Retool, when you serve such a breadth of use cases, how do you effectively message and product market? What would be your advice to founders who actually serve a very broad customer base, from dentists to accountants to developers, with a very horizontal tool?
Well, you have to choose. You can't be everything to everyone, or you'll be kind of pretty crap at all of it. Your platform can have a vision, have an aspiration of being everything to everyone, but it has to have a specific subset of users, a subset of the sort of the market for which you're amazing at the beginning. And there's a variety of reasons for it. On the product itself, it's because almost all of these problems are more complicated than you think they are. So as you unravel it, and as you kind of really think about the customer's entire use case, then you learn that there's a lot more that they need to build. But even beyond the product, it has a go-to-market element to it. You want to find a group of people that talk to one another. You don't that's the whole idea of kind of getting a certain flywheel is, you get a certain momentum. So if you're only in the, Node.js ecosystem technologically, then, that community, they talk about you. You're at an event, you hear about it from multiple people. A person that moves from one company to another brings you along, but that's also true for HR software, and HR leaders talk to one another. It's true for sort of, finance. It's true for all of those. And so you have to pick a slice, be amazing at it, and evolve from it. And that piece needs to be sort of big enough and small enough, right? It needs to be big enough to care, that it can feed you for a while, that it can be an important enough anchor, that it could be a good stepping stone for adjacencies as you expand. But it needs to be small enough that you can make it to the top, that you can become a force kind of within that community.
I totally agree with you there. Can I ask, I think we learn a lot from our mistakes. When you look back at kind of the history of Snyk, what are the biggest messaging mistakes you made? Is there one where you're like, I can't believe we did that?
I don't know that I think Snyk has been naturally very iterative, and so we've made a lot of sort of small steps, and some of them were reverted back, and some not so much. I think the primary challenge that Snyk has, and always kind of the needle to thread, is this developer versus security. I think the homepage is a good example of it. What you say, you only have one homepage. So let's say you can create a single landing page that is more developer oriented, or a single landing page that is more security oriented. But the homepage you have to choose. You have to actually prioritize, and you have to sort them. So what I would say is that at the beginning, we were so tunnel visioned on developers that at some point, a security person coming along that didn't happen to have a GitHub login couldn't register to the service. We were so kind of focused on sort of satisfying the developer, so narrow-minded of no, this is all about developers, that really, and I say at some point, we're talking 8 months after the product launch, for a long while, security people, unless they had a GitHub account, the only way to register was with GitHub.
Did it just go up and to the right? Sorry, because we look at it today, and it's like, however many billion-dollar company it is, and I should know that, but however many $1 billion, did it just go up and to the right, or was there this? Was there a board meeting with AdSim at all where you looked at each other and went, "Oh, this isn't working to plan"? Yeah, that I might have heard about.
It's amazing how sort of history remembers the successes and not the sort of the failures. No, not at all. Snyk. I think what worked well at Snyk from the beginning is getting developer adoption, and so we were very, very, very focused on. The most important thing we're looking to crack is get developers to embrace a security product. If we figure that out, revenue will come. And I think we've been...
That's not always the case though, is it? I mean, we see a lot of tools which get a lot of developer adoption and a lot of love, and revenue does not come.
Yeah. And I think it depends. You have to sort of assess your market. And I do think that I had a certain depth of understanding in this one. My sense was in security, nothing is ever easy, but generally speaking, it's closer to money. There is business to be had. I was fairly confident that I can monetize in security. I felt I wanted to build a company, sort of figure out a solution to a problem that matters. And that problem was getting developers to embrace security. And so I thought the most difficult thing, the biggest thing to prove was that developers will actually embrace this security solution if you build the right company, if you build the right solution. And so that's why we were so focused on it. I entirely underestimated the gap between getting that to be successful, which we did, to actually getting a commercial business going. And so
what was the gap? Time?
So we basically successfully got developers to embrace this. And then at some point we sort of opened up the payment gateways and allowed people to pay for it, and nobody did. And then we sort of worked through it. And this is so maybe about a year into the company, we had GA'd. We've had a beta out for about 9 months. And we had, thousands or maybe tens of thousands of users at the time. And we opened up sort of the online purchase and nothing, like a minuscule trickle came in. And really a year later, we were still at 100,000 ARR in the budget. So at this point, it's like 2 years in, and many millions of dollars burned, and tens of thousands of users. And so
did
something
you still
successful.
Believe then?
So I had to reaffirm the conviction. I had two primary moments where I had to do that. One was I had an advisor who was I really kind of think of him in high regard, who kind of heard, he wasn't super involved, but sort of heard the conversation doing it and says, "Guy, I think you're fucked." I don't know if I'm sort of allowed to sort of swear here. He says, "Guy, I think you're fucked. You're basically classic dev tool kind of pitfall, which is, you get a lot of developer love, but nobody's willing to spend money on it." And really kind of, I was pissed. I was really annoyed. I kind of came back, this was San Francisco, kind of flew back to London, and basically spent the weekend sort of fuming and thinking, am I doing it? And the bottom line was basically reaffirming the conviction that like I would rather crash and burn than pivot to just sort of focusing on the security audience, in that like I don't want to build just another slightly better mousetrap. I want to build something that matters, and what matters is breaking through to developers. And so that was a big one. And then I guess sort of a similar, maybe a little bit more frequent case is even before that, I had a whole horde of VCs come along, see the thousands of users outside, see the visibility, and basically trigger a preemptive process. And I leaned in. I said, okay, like it looks compelling. I think, like I basically, drank my own Kool-Aid. And I leaned in, and everybody, and I mean everybody, kind of, looked at the company, and repeatedly everybody, and I mean everybody, looked at it and says, "Oh, amazing usage, no revenue. Can we stay friends? Maybe we'll consider for the next round. We don't know you yet, blah, 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 blah."
Do you have any advice for founders having been through that then?
I think you have to be careful around how quickly you lean into a preemptive notion. Preemptive, and the idea of sort of VCs coming along and sort of saying, "Hey, maybe I want it so bad I will pay up ahead of time," is very ego boosting, and it feels very good. And then you also know that you don't want just one horse, like you don't want just sort of, one bidder. And so it's very easy to say, why don't I talk to everybody now? And when you do that, you're sort of going a bit all in, and I think you can really burn, kind of, you leave some scorched earth. I think for us, if it wasn't for Ed Sim at Boldstart and, sort of like him and Elliot being believers, and they basically topped us up. We did get some offers. We just didn't get the right offer from the right investor. And I had a whole personal thing. My father-in-law passed away literally kind of during the same sort of week on it. And I was sort of, thinking of whether I take VC calls from the Shiva, from the sort of it was an intense period. And they stepped up and says, like, look, we see it, we believe it, we think you're sort of on the right path. Why don't you take this sort of smaller, this bridge check on the best valuation that you've received in this sort of term sheet, but a smaller amount of money. And that was great, like on really all around. And that set us up and allowed us to get to the point, this was still 8 months before we got to 100,000 ARR. But then 4 months after that, instead of 100,000, we were at 650. And a year after that, we were at 4.5 million. And so basically the roughly 2 years in, 2.5 years in, the dollar funnel started going to the right direction.
I'm in many companies that are at, 100K in ARR after several $1 million burnt and several years. And honestly, as an investor, I'm going, oh God, why don't they just give me my money back or give up or do something different? This is not fucking working. What do you say to those founders who's been through it, and how do they know whether to keep going or actually just it's not working?
Just call it a day. I think you have to have an understanding. To me, it comes back to that sort of first principles thinking. And so you have to break it down and says, why is it not working? If the answers are only, well, if only I built this feature, if only I talked to that person, then I think you're missing something. For us, I think there was a deeper understanding of saying our challenge was, developers like depth and security needs breadth. And so we built this amazing product for the Node.js surrounding, and the Node.js developers wanted this. And eventually when security, but we didn't really care or we didn't give any time to security audiences and what their needs are. And once you started talking to them, you understood a few tactical things they needed, which were important and we innovated for. But also you understand that security, they can't have every director of engineering use their own sort of security tools. They need to be able to govern a security concern across. And so they need breadth. They need a certain amount of coverage. And so we were on this path of saying, okay, we need to broaden the technology stacks that we support. And so we had a certain theory for it, and we were proving it out. So I think if you're just churning, if you're just trying to kind of, hit in different directions, then it might indeed be sort of a problematic sense. You have to have a theory of change of why. What is it fundamentally that is causing my current situation, and what am I doing about it to significantly change it? Whether it is reach, whether it is, core product principles, and therefore which use cases do they enable, whether it is indeed, sort of a different sort of buyer persona than a user persona, etc.
That's a really interesting one, different buyer persona versus user persona, because I think what we're seeing now with kind of the downturn in the macro is the kind of reversion back to purchasing power to the CFO in a lot of cases, away from kind of individual contributors and teams having a lot of purchasing power. And so we now have, very segmented buyer personas and then user personas, as you put it. How do you think about effective messaging when the person buying is not the person using?
Yeah. It's really tough. I mean, I do think this is a bit of a tough moment for PLG companies. I still think that it's a temporary reality, and so you have to think about
what
build
makes
the
you
right
think it's
approach.
a temporary reality?
Well, I think a lot of the fundamentals that got us to sort of the PLG movement is the fact that modern organizations rely on an empowered workforce that can make decisions and move quickly. It's the understanding that the organization that is big and tries to make all the decisions centrally never moves. Nothing ever gets done because everything needs to roll to the top or get consensus. And so I think that appreciation, DevOps is an example, but it really works in sort of finance, works in many others, is moves to the point in which you expect teams to own things and run with things more. And for that to happen, you have to give them empowerment, you have to give them autonomy. Now, at the moment, everybody's looking for places to cut. And so, empowerment is not the word of the day, and things get centralized. And you have to, if you're a startup, you have to acknowledge that in the current reality, and you can shift your messaging a little bit to focus on, for instance, productivity or basically things about cost savings that this product can provide. But it's a little bit tricky because you might get lured down a path that is not product-led, that is enterprise, even though your market is really best situated to be one with product-led. So it's a bit tricky. I have a few angel investments like that, and it's not easy. You have to make a case-by-case decision. But I think, fundamentally, over time, I still think product-led, empowerment-oriented solutions that focus on the user versus the buyer are important. You have to help your users communicate with your buyers. You have to help them understand what is the use case, what is the value proposition. I mean, I've said use case probably already a dozen times, and I say it all the time because people confuse this with they say ROI, they say features, they talk about the technology, they talk about just finance. All of those are not important. What's important is the value to the customer. All of these things are just sort of symptoms of it. And so you really have to understand what is the value. And my favorite statement to customers is to say, look, if we align on the value that we provide you, we should be able to align on the price. So, I mean, I think if you figure that out as a company, what is the value you provide? Now it's just an articulation element. It's just it's about how do you get that message across.
So I agree it's a tough time for PLG. I also think it's a tough time for unbundled specialized products. I think we're going to see this kind of reversion back to a world of bundling where everything's just cheaper. You will probably give up your Calendly and go back to Google Calendar if you are in a large organization, as an example. And I'm not picking on Calendly, but just an example. Do you agree with that reversion back to bundling? And how do you advise founders then who are in an unbundled world?
It's always a bit of a balance, between them. And so best of breed products for the point activity that they provide are presumably better. They're best of breed. And so they will have the individual or the specific small unit provide value, while presumably the sort of the platform solutions or the broad solutions, the idea is that their overall value will be better. And so even if they're sort of on every point case, they're only 80% as good, then they will eventually provide more value to the organization. So it does indeed come back to like who is making that decision. I think right now there is a lot of platform consolidation. I will admit that Snyk is benefiting from that. Now that we have the breadth, but I think a lot of it is from just from cost savings perspective. Single vendor relationships, things of that nature. But I think there are ways to build a platform that actually makes it truly better in total if you make your products work together. And so I think it really again comes back to that notion of how much additional value, how differentiated you are. If you're a point best of breed product that is doubly as good, is twice as good as the generic product, you probably will still succeed. Like companies or customers will still want to use you as long as you articulate that value well. If you're I think what maybe has changed is, the appetite for a product that is 20% better, but is indeed, separate and has all the overhead of having another vendor and another solution implemented.
Products are often categorized as either painkillers or vitamins. Do you invest in vitamins?
I think it's about what is your primary value proposition versus secondary. And so, is a productivity tool a vitamin? It depends, right? If I could save you sort of 2 developers out of 10, you could have 10 and you can work, and it might not be necessarily your sort of pain point, but I can pretty easily, if you pay me for 1 and I saved you 2, that's pretty good math.
It's probably the extent to which it provides productivity. Like a 5% increase is a vitamin.
And the credibility or sort of the how likely or, how much of a leap of faith is it for me to sort of believe that it actually is sort of saving me. So like automation tools, for instance, are very easy to prove that they demonstrate productivity, versus metrics and analytics tools, which sort of says, hey, you'll just be able to optimize better. So there's a lot more sort of leap of faith. And so, I think it is better to have a nerve. It's better to have like a pain that you're addressing when you're talking about the primary. I like to think I have this like 2x2 in my head, which talks about kind of pain and frequency. So if something is low frequency, high pain, something like maybe like a big incident that happens, or maybe, building your sort of RBAC system or something, then really you need a strategy that is all about presence. You need to, it's high pain. So when it happens, you need to be there, and be available. If something is low frequency, is high frequency, low pain, then it's all about friction. It's something that always bothers you a little bit. And so the effort of picking up a solution needs to be proportional to sort of the pain that you're sensing. So it's really all about friction, and so I think those are the 2 primaries. If something is high frequency, high pain, it's all about comparing it to the existing solution, because there's no way that they're not doing anything about something that is high frequency, high pain. And so it's all about the better mousetrap. It's all about differentiating from existing approaches to solving it. And if something is low frequency, low pain, and maybe that's like a version of some of the vitamins, then it can't be your lead. At best, it can be a feature, but it can't be the primary thing that you're doing.
Yeah, no, I really like that kind of matrix to kind of think through. We're both big fans of 7 Powers, Hamilton Helmer. I think probably one of the foundational books that I get everyone to read who joins 20VC. Why do you think it's really important for founders to understand 7 Powers and where their powers lie first?
So I'm a big fan of the Powers framework. For those who don't know, at the high level, it talks about how do you deliver value to a customer, eventually forming as like free cash flow in a way that is sustainable, superior, and significant. So something that is truly better, it's truly superior, it's significant, it matters that it's better at whatever it is that it does. It's not whatever, an ice cream truck with sort of the tallest roof, it doesn't matter. And it is sustainable, it's hard to copy. And so that's the idea of these 7 powers, which is kind of like moats, but moats are all defensive. And I love the sort of the powers beyond being more elaborate. They talk about how to sort of provide value and create a valuable business. I think the reason it's important is the worst thing that can happen, in my opinion, to a startup is not to crash and burn, but to get stuck. Is to build something that is like a little bit valuable, and you build it up to a business that is 2, 3, 5 million in ARR, not dismissing the sort of the difficulty of doing that, but then you get stuck. You grow at a 20% rate from sort of that rate, and it's too good to just walk away from, but it's sort of really not what you signed up for when you, or your investors signed up for. And I think powers really are about the ability to grow your business. You think ahead, again, you anchor in the future, and you say, what is it that I'm building that will actually allow me to build on and grow? And if you don't have power, if you're sort of building something that just has product market fit, but is actually pretty easy to copy, if you're building something that purely relies on operational excellence, then you're in a pretty risky situation, right? If any competitor comes along or like a burst of incumbent sort of operational excellence, and you might sort of lose your place, the idea of power is indeed to be that multiple. And so I don't think you should like dive in and only care about power at the beginning. You need to be building value or like sustaining some value you created. But if you don't think about it, then you're carrying that risk of just getting stuck.
Do you believe in defensibility at the early stages? This is something that's kind of, I'm very strong on, which is like defensibility from day one is bullshit, I always think. Do you agree with that? Or do you actually think when you're looking at companies you angel invest in are highly defensible? I like this. And defensibility plays a big part of your mindset.
Well, I think at the beginning, you can't be defensible. You have nothing, So I think maybe the only exception to that is if you have very unique knowledge in the founding team, then maybe that's an exception.
I think now actually is a really unique time with kind of the new wave of AI companies, which is like if you come out of 10 years of, I don't know, Stanford's AI lab, that is a defensible moat of knowledge, which other people likely don't have.
Potentially, although now that has grown, so that's, so that's the cornered resource kind of power, right? And do you have some sort of very unique set of skills that nobody else can have? And are they indeed superior and indeed significant? But
have you seen Taken? Liam Neeson. No. There's a brilliant line. His daughter gets kidnapped, and he calls the kidnapper and he says, "I have a very unique set of skills." And it's exactly that statement. So it's terrifying.
So it could be. I think specifically right now in AI, the space is moving fast enough, and there are enough people that it's not really a cornered resource. It can be, a necessary and a valuable capability, but I think it's hard for that to be alone. But what I do think is critical is to think about how does this business become defensible. So say like if you assume success, if you assume you found product market fit, which absolutely should be consuming you, like 90+% of your attention should be on product market fit, not power at the beginning. You have to build something of value to then sustain and differentiate.
So step one, get product market fit, and then we think about 7 powers.
Correct. So I think when I invest, I think about some theories about how you could build a defensible project over here. If this was to succeed, what is it? Would you have a network? Would you be accumulating some data? Would you be aggregating, accumulating switching costs, from within the customer? Is there any sort of counter positioning that you're doing it here? Are you doing something that incumbents, even if they see, they would choose not to adopt, like the Netflix Blockbuster example, right? Or for Snyk, it was dev first. Dev first is something that is counter positioned to the security industry because
look at this with traditional journalism, they will never send you questions ahead of time ever, and they choose not to. I will always do that. It's a counter-positioning example, I think.
I think so, and I don't know the industry well enough, but it's an example of that, of saying if people are already well incentivized to believe and stick to the existing system as it works, because that is what makes them powerful today, then counter-positioning against them. And so I think, per Helmer's book, the 2 powers that you build at inception are cornered resource and counter-positioning. And so you can come indeed with some unique knowledge or perspective, or with a counter-position that is hard. That's like the innovator's dilemma, hard for sort of the incumbent to produce. I don't think you should focus on those, but as an investor, even at the early stage, I try to theorize about what could it be. And then once you theorize that, you put that aside and you really just focus on product market fit, and you have to get something working. Once you get something working, then you start tweaking. Then it's like when you're getting to the point where you hit product market fit and now you need to sort of scale some things and things like that, then maybe you should tweak priorities. You shouldn't overhaul priorities, but you should tweak priorities for things that matter. It could be the type of like legal license you give to your customers around the use of data that you have. It could be investing in some viral mechanism. It could be trying to sort of invest in stickiness in sort of switching costs.
If we think about kind of product market fit, just as the first chapter before we move to the 7 powers, I had an investor update last night, and it was a 1.4 million ARR business. It's got there over a 2.5 year period. It's kind of been a little bit slower than everyone thought. It's not growing particularly fast, but it's not doing badly, but it's taken quite a lot of cash to get there. And I just looked at it and I said, does this have product market fit? I don't know. Customers are staying, they're paying, there's enough of them, there's enough money. 1.4 million, it's not nothing, but it's not being pulled out of their hands. Yeah. Was it very obvious for you when you had product market fit? And when more often than not with your angel investments, is it obvious?
Yeah. I think, sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. To me, product market fit is really about when demand kind of outweighs your capacity to satisfy it. When you kind of can't, hire people fast enough, spin up servers fast enough, whatever it is, to sort of scale because demand outstrips it, then I think you sort of hit product market fit. I think, kind of like first to market, it's a little bit of a poorly defined term. For Snyk, there were at least sort of two elements to it. There was kind of the product user fit of getting to developers. And so I think we hit that one pretty quickly. And there was a lot of learning still about sort of getting that done, but I think we got that. But it was very different between that and the product buyer fit, which is probably a bit more akin to product marketing if you talk about the business.
For me, with you, it's like, you've got the product user fit and then you've got the business model fit. It's almost like the same problem as Twitter in some ways, I find, which is like Twitter's a great product like Snyk in the early days was, but like you now need to layer on a business model that works.
Yep. And so that's why I think in use cases, I think in value propositions. And so who is it that you provide value to? And, can that person, that's the first question. If you don't provide value, then, it's no good. And are there enough of those? And then eventually would they pay?
Do you think there's different degrees of quality when you look at the different 7 powers? So like, brand power is one. And when I look at that, I'm like, I love it. And I'm as much a brand person as anyone, but I believe it's inherently more transient and momentum driven than some of the other powers that we can discuss. Do you believe there's different variants of quality of power?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think actually I've had a couple of conversations with Hamilton. And so we discussed this, he kind of ends up dissing his own brand and process power. So it says like both of those are just so easy to claim that they end up being a little bit loose in your definition.
Do you agree with that? I look at brands like Chanel, like Louis Vuitton.
Though brand power is very powerful, it's sort of like for a tech startup or for a company that is building out, it's just so easy to claim that you have brand. But I think the idea of brand is really to be able to sell the same product for a significantly higher price because of people sort of taking pride for it. And so like, for instance, you think about Snyk, so Snyk has a certain amount of brand power. There's a certain amount of like fairy dust, sort of DevOps fairy dust that all the security companies want. There's a certain amount of that people believe. But it's not a sustainable, sort of superior, significant capability. I think that's really the sort of the risk with powers, is that people try to call everything a power. And that loses the sort of the whole kind of idea of defining and understanding your powers, is that, where to invest.
Let's analyze Snyk. Which of the 7 powers, if you could choose 2, are you like, I hang my hat, we have these the strongest?
So, at Snyk, we went pretty deep on it. And so we do have, we've done sort of power exercises for different competitor groups, like our powers as compared to the dev tools that try to go into security versus our powers compared to the security players are a little bit different because, the sort of the capabilities, what's normal in the ecosystem is different. I'd sort of say that Snyk's 2 primary powers are, one was counter positioning, which sort of still holds in the security space, this notion of coming in developer first, is to an extent at the expense of some CISO power, of some sort of top-down decision power, in which a lot of these security companies have sort of been designed to satisfy. And so that whole approach is very different. And then the second is and I will claim process power here, despite the sort of the criticality, and that is developer product-led growth, sort of the PLG in the security industry. And that was actually my argument with sort of Hamilton, which was to say, like, I think that if you go into an industry that is traditionally top-down, it is coming in with a product-led approach is counterposition at the beginning, but over time you build process power by the sense that, let's say, a bunch of people, resigned from Snyk and went to an existing sort of company, even a new company, but definitely sort of an existing one, and they try to replicate the product-led growth motion within that company. It'll be very hard for them to do it. It is kind of mirrored into the culture and the product and the go-to-market, and it's so intertwined in how we operate that it's very hard to replicate. But it is a power against the security incumbents. It is not a power against, the sort of the ones coming from the dev tooling side.
How does your understanding, if you isolate those now and you sit in the room with your team, you're like, great, we know those two powers are really well restricted. How does that change how you operate and lead? Does it change how you operate and lead?
First, it might be interesting to sort of think a little bit about the exercise that we've done. So what we've done was, we took 4 primary competitor categories, and for each of those, we try to write down the primary capabilities that we differentiate on in those areas. And then we thought about the capabilities we could build, that we think that are sort of interesting to us. And then for each one of those, we sort of assessed, like, are they truly superior, significant, sustainable? And that was a good exercise, even if we've done nothing else. And sometimes, actually, we've done this a few times. Sometimes we've done nothing but the conversation, but it still distills your understanding of it. And I think that's very important. It helps. It's a mechanism. This and questions like, would this be more important in 5 years or not, are things that I do with the product organizations, and definitely with the labs organizations, which is very kind of skilled in this now, to help us anchor in the future, to help us think about where it is going and where it is headed. And so that is very valuable. By the way, the hardest part is then distilling that into the top items. What is the 1 or the 2 items that you would pick for every sort of box?
What do you think is the biggest mistake that founders make when they consider 7 powers?
Well, most of them just don't consider 7 powers, right? They think about things a bit more loosely. But I think people are unwilling to pick. They think this is important, and this is important, and this is important. And so they end up underinvesting in the things that matter most. And so especially in the context of success, and we've done this at Snyk a bunch of times as well. I'm not sort of claiming in a sense here. At some point you sort of feel like the world is your oyster. You can do a lot of different things, and you go into them. So at the beginning, it's about product market fit. It's not about powers. So if you actually over-rotate on powers, that would be the mistake. Over time, as you get something that is successful, I think powers are important because they help you pick the next thing to do. They help you ask, okay, if you're going to expand into X, right, add another product or expand an audience, which of your powers, like the best question to ask is, which of your powers help you in that expansion? If the answer is none, then you really should pause and reconsider, because basically you're saying, I'm going to go into those areas and I'm going to compete on operational excellence merits alone. And so if you don't even know what your powers are, pause and go off and have a conversation about it. And it doesn't really matter if you use the powers kind of framework. It doesn't, that's just a helper. It's about understanding what are your core sort of sustainable differentiators.
In terms of product market fit, I think the single biggest I've done now, astonishingly, 170 investments over like 8 years. But the single biggest determinant of companies that reach product market fit versus those that don't, I found, is like speed of execution, like granular speed of execution. Do you agree with that? And how important do you think speed of execution is in terms of getting to product market fit?
Getting to product market fit is heavily reliant on execution. It does, it's a...
But speed of it. When teams, you just feel how fast they move.
Yeah. I think of it as iteration. And I think there's almost like an element of hubris in thinking that you can sort of get into your ivory tower, come out in a year and come out with some wondrous thing that is precisely right. It isn't really, I think, the best sort of bet for you to make. And so, I'm a believer, and I think what you need to do is you need to iterate And I think that is the sort of the speed of delivery. How quickly do you iterate? The faster you do that, the faster you learn. The faster you learn, the faster you're going to hit product market fit. So I agree with that. The one caveat that I would add is you need to be iterating in the right direction. And so I think, I like to say that if you're good, then you optimize for the feedback you get. But if you're not good, that's a different problem. And if you optimize for the feedback you get, you want to set yourself up to be getting the feedback in the area that matters. And so if you want to build a product-led growth company, and all of the feedback you get is from a dozen design partners that you work with in a top-down fashion with sort of the CTO, then you will optimize for something, but it's unlikely that you would optimize for getting a self-serve, community-led product. And so you want to iterate quickly, but you want to understand what is the fit between your product and the go-to-market, and you want to put yourself in a position to get the feedback in the right direction.
Can I be honest? I fucking hate this design partner bullshit. Sorry, I know it's very uncouth of me to be so direct, but it's just like, whatever happened to early customers who helped you build product alongside you because they were passionate about your vision and bought into it with you and hoped that you would be able to eventually provide it?
Yeah.
Now a design partner is like intermittent fasting and skipping breakfast. Yeah.
I think it's some of it is just sort of whatever sort of washing a little bit of the wording. Some of it is that I do think that there are more startups now than ever, and so if you're a buyer, and we're a buyer now as well, sort of you get those. You get inundated with these sort of startups around, and you want to do it, and then the workforce is empowered. So like 7 different teams want to use 12 different products, and so I think there's an element of I think the difference between the early customers and the design partners is you're basically vying for their time more than you're sort of vying for their money. But from the buyer perspective, from the kind of customer's perspective, is you're already asking for your time. Don't ask for my money. Help me. I mean, design partner is a term. I do think that it's important to get early customers that help you shape them. I think those customers should get some form of perk, whether it is a heavy discount or whatever agreement. But I think most of the time they also do it because they are passionate about it.
There are so many other areas I want to talk to you about, but as I said, we look at Sneak and it looks like this up and to the right. Post product market fit, was there ever a time when it went flat? Or like I remember when you raised I think it was your A from Excel and from GV and from great people, and everything just always looks up and to the right. Was there ever a time when it was like a flat quarter and everyone's going, what's going on here?
So Sneak, the flatness was mostly before we sort of hit the curve, on it. I think since then it's been like the opposite. It's like our CFO calls it, kinks in the curve of sort of, going steeper and steeper. Our growth actually accelerated. All that to say, until the sort of the current market in which, we like sort of others are definitely, there's a certain amount of sort of slap in the face or whatever cold water bucket that you get. I think we're, relatively speaking, super well positioned, lots of money in the bank. The needs themselves of the market are not ones. They're definitely an aspirin and not a vitamin. They can't choose not to do them. But the numbers are different in this world.
This is so unfair of me to ask because it's just such a broad and shit question, but I do want to ask it anyway. You've raised multiple rounds of funding from some of the best in the business. What do you think are the most common mistakes you see your angel investments make when fundraising with venture investors? And what are some of your biggest lessons from raising from some of the best in the business?
Well, I learned a ton from investing with various people, whether it's like with angels or with VCs. I think the biggest mistake angels make investing with VCs is kind of underappreciating the different contexts, especially if you're sort of co-investing with a VC that is primarily an A or a B VC, and they're signing a seed check. For them, it's a very small bet. It's the opportunity to go ahead. Well, for you, it might actually be, as an angel, that might be your sort of primary check. And so you just need to, I think I put a lot of weight into the diligence and sort of the vetting that, some of the sort of the venture firms that I co-invest with do. And so I do value that a lot, but I also want to contextualize it for me and to say whether that's important. And for me personally, I guess I don't know if it's like a learning from me or from others, is I invest, while I expect a financial return, I invest largely for the learning, for the journey. I feel it helps me. First of all, it's fun. Second is, it helps me actually in Sneak, it helps me sort of understand. I think it helps me be a better craftsman. And so I have all sorts of filters that the sort of the VCs don't necessarily have, like, I don't know, I guess maybe some VCs do, but like my first filter is, do I want to get on a call with this person again? Like, do I like them? And then, others are, is this an area that is of interest to me? Yeah, ironically, for instance, I don't invest that much in cyber. And, there are exceptions to that statement, but for the most part, I'm more passionate about sort of product-led and those types of systems, and cyber tends to be sort of more top-down. And so I think you build your personal preferences. Don't just sort of think of it as an asset class.
How many checks have you written?
I'm close to 100 at this point, but it's over the course of the last decade.
Can I ask, do you financially allocate towards angel investing? Do you look at kind of holdings and go, okay, we're going to put X amount here into angel investments?
Only as a limiting factor, as don't go overboard. I mean, my primary limiting factor is time. I invest versus taking advisory roles because I want to know, like, the base minimum is you get my money and, hopefully that's helping you build. Now, on top of that, I want to be a value add investor and I want to learn from the journey. And so we're relevant, and where I can, I take calls, and I do a fair bit of those. I probably spend, a day a week or so, on angel related stuff, maybe a little bit less. So that is my primary limiting factor. Beyond that, I've kind of veered a little bit because I do as much as I do now in sort of direct angel investments. I mostly actually kind of reduced my kind of LP allocation. I find I do want to limit my venture exposure. And I think it's important to remember for me is like, most of my money is still in Snyk. Most of my money is in the venture, my business, like everything around me. I am in a high risk mode. And so in theory, the wise thing for me to do in the bank is to put all my money in some fixed income account and sort of, get it there, because really it's about sort of don't lose this, the money that I have. In practice, I just don't work that way. I'm a risk taker and I enjoy the journey. And so.
What's been your biggest investing mistake?
Investing in things that are obvious. I think when you, and it's really because they stay small and they come back to sort of being almost entirely focused on operational excellence. I like that there's something a little bit crazy. So I try to count the leaps of faith that I have to make in making an investment. If it is too many, I don't invest. But if there are none, I also don't invest. I need, there needs to be something a little bit out of the ordinary, a little bit like I believe that for this to actually translate into something big.
So I always have, if we need a secondary jump, I'm out. And so a great example of that would be a neobank for teenagers. Okay, the big question, the risk there is, can we transcend for kids or for teenagers to also converting them into just adult customers? That's the jump, really. What I don't like is for adult customers, and then there's an additional jump beyond that, like the secondary jump, then I'm out. Yeah. Do you see what I mean?
I do. And I do think, it's easy to see how if you have too many leaps of faith, then you can't do it. I think to me, the learning was that if there are no leaps of faith, it probably means there are a dozen companies doing exactly the same thing. And, if you were to do it, which I, at this point, typically don't, then you really are heavily betting on the operational excellence of that team. And so that's a different lens to sort of assess for the team.
I totally agree. It's price-wise, have the best companies consistently been the highest price when you look back?
No, I think there is a correlation. So I think it comes back a little bit to the sort of the founder's ability to sell versus their ability to raise money, right? If you can articulate the opportunity very well, then oftentimes that translates both to your ability to sell it to investors and the ability to sell to customers. But no, I don't think it correlates heavily. I think it's slightly. And I do think also companies can get themselves in trouble by raising too much money too early, mostly because they end up sort of pouring fuel on areas that don't actually need to be accelerated because you don't actually know what you're doing. And so I think it's dangerous. Now we're in a slightly different reality in which some companies that have raised at a higher valuation, they need to sort of mentally prepare that they're going to work their ass off for another sort of 2 years now to basically get a flat round, because they got such a kind of overvalued round. So if you're early and you're pre-revenue and you got $100 million pre-money valuation in the previous round, you now need to get some revenue and you need to work on it. And hopefully in the next round, you've earned that sort of $100 million valuation.
Will you be able to retain your talent? As team members, you're going, wait a minute, I'm going to bust my ass off for 2 years and I'm going to have flat stock options. when I could just go to an AI company and get boosted stock options?
Yeah, I mean, I think it always is a conversation. Hopefully, especially early, you have people that are sort of fairly excited about the role that they play in the growth. I also feel like people should get sort of top ups in equity, and I think investors should be ready to do that. I mean, you got the higher valuation, and so you raised more money at a lower price. It's a little bit easier for the valuation for the sort of the investor that actually has paid that amount, but it's a little bit harder for them to accept it. But I think generally speaking, people should be financially incentivized in a competitive manner around that growth, and they should be believers in the mission, especially early.
2 more questions, and they're really unfair, but I'm going to ask them anyway, and you can't get away from it because there's a light on you. What was the best first investor meeting you had?
The best first investors, someone who invested in Sneak.
You're someone who invested in Sneak, or maybe didn't invest in Sneak, but the first investor meeting that you had with them, where it was just like, this person gets it. They understand, they see the future with me. This is a mind meld.
Yeah, it's tough because it sort of, goes a fair bit back. I mean, the name that comes to mind is Amit Patel, who is an angel investor who joined us in that sort of round in which like everybody was looking at it and sort of saying, thanks, but no thanks on it, and Boltstar did the top up. I think he's the only angel investor to sort of have joined there. And he's a professional angel investor, and I've sort of been like, I think is, one of, if not the most sort of impactful angel investor in Sneak.
I love that. Okay, fantastic. Listen, I want to dive into a quick fire round now. So I say a short statement and you give me your immediate thoughts. Does that sound okay?
Yeah.
So what do you know for sure that others don't believe to be true?
That when you have a good idea, you're not the only one that has it, or that rather that you never have as much time as you think to act. We think that we're sort of these unique creatures that just have this sort of unique insight. In practice, we're influenced by everything that happens around us, and there are other smart people around. They're noticing the same thing, and they're probably building the same type of solution with the same principles at the same time. So you better get going.
What's the biggest hiring mistake you've made?
Probably hiring for too big too early. And so sort of hiring people that are over-oriented at sort of processes or longer term status of the company, trying to sort of be ready ahead, but are not necessarily that good in today's needs.
You can invest in one fund as an LP, obviously apart from 20VC. Which fund do you invest in?
I like a bunch of different phases, but Boltstar would probably be my pick.
I love that. What's the most painful lesson that you're also most pleased to have learned because of the learnings that you have from it?
I think that when someone isn't working out in the company consistently, then letting them go is not only in the company's favor, but also in their favor. You're really doing them no favor, keeping them in a failed position. That's doubly correct when the company is growing. When you're in hypergrowth, when someone starts to fall behind, especially in a leadership position, they need to be twice as good to be able to catch up and keep kind of accelerating to the twice in size, that you're going to be in a short order of time. And oftentimes you're just setting them up for failure.
You brought in a CEO who, sat on the board for many years and, you worked closely with for many years, but you handed over the role of CEO. Was that hard?
It was hard. It was also one of the better decisions that I've made. I think you have to understand what is it that you want to do. If you want to be a big company CEO, then as a founder, as long as you're executing well, you have the right to do it. Otherwise, you want to ask what the company needs from me most and what do I want to do? And for me, I felt like the thing I was like most valuable thing that I could give the company was around my ability to see around corners, my ability to understand where this is going. And I basically didn't have time to give that to the company because I was spending all my time trying to scale the organization. And the flip side, I had this opportunity to bring Peter, who was, he's amazing and my relationship with him is unique. And he could basically come on, do that better and focus me on the other piece. And that was also where my passion was. And so, just because something is working doesn't mean it can't be better. So it wasn't from a point of failure. It was, another step that made it even better. And it was very hard, and it continues to be hard, like any kind of partnership is.
How has being a father changed the way you operate and lead?
I find that the analogy of the company is your baby, your startup is your baby, very apt. And I think one of the things you learn, I have 2 kids, is, when you have one child and you want to accommodate their needs, then it's really about like, they want whatever, and you need to either like absorb it and give them or not. When you have two children, you realize you're in a position in which you have to, one child's desires might come at the expense of the other, and you have to actually teach them to, do the balance and do what you think is communally best. And I think it's the same kind of in the company. Clearly it's adults and not kids, but you kind of learn over time that you can't please everyone, and I want everybody to love me, and I think many people do, but at some point when you have enough people, you're not going to there's going to be some people that are unpleased, and you need to do the things that is in the kind of the greater good, and the good of the sort of the broader family, even when you still think about it as a family, and even when those are hard moves to make.
Do you agree with we're a family, not a team, or do you think it's a team, not a family?
I think it's a team, but I think teams can get awfully intimate. I think it's okay. It's a team that is on a mission, and what type of team is it? Is it sort of a commando unit, sort of stuck in some format? Is it sort of a set of explorers kind of going to Antarctica and doing it? It's not a team as in a group of friends who met for a basketball game, kind of on the courts and kind of went back home. It's a team that is all in together. And I think sometimes that's a more intimate and sort of close-knit group than a family. And so making moves like, letting someone go or quitting if you're sort of one that goes, they can be awfully emotional and awfully personal. I do think it is a team, because you can't fire a child, and you can't fire an employee. You can't quit from your family. I know many would want to. And so I think it is a team, but it doesn't make it any less intimate.
What's the single best performing angel investment when you think about like cash back DPI or TVPI, but like potential to return or return cash? What's the best one?
Yeah, I think there's a time horizon element to it. Probably for me right now, it's a security scorecard, which has done very well. And I was, invested all the way back at sort of $6 million valuation. But a bunch of others are doing quite well. Cloudinary maybe is the other contender. Maybe even better. Cloudinary is an image management company that's been bootstrapped that I was an advisor in early on. So yeah, I've got a few of them, and I do think Synthesia is an amazing company I'm invested in now. Lightdash. There's a bunch of like great companies that I'm excited to be investors in.
Penultimate one. What would you like to change about the world of venture?
Venture companies would never invest in venture companies. There's nothing scalable. There's no tech. There's no real kind of scalable assets in venture today. I think it's like a lot of most of it is like law firm style. A bunch of smart people that are relying on hiring additional smart people. And the little tech that does get built is all about deal flow. It's all about sort of finding investment companies. And I would love to see venture investing in tech that makes their companies more successful, that makes them more scalable, but in general, kind of make it a bit more sort of systematic. And I believe, I don't know sort of for sure that there are sort of inklings of this that are happening, but I think that can be a disruptive force in the world of venture.
Final one for you, Guy. 2033, 10 years, okay? Where's Guy then?
Yeah, I don't really believe myself if I talk about past the 5-year horizon, but what I would like to think is that I focus on our family foundation. So we started a charity focusing on social inequality, and it's a learning journey right now. It's a pilot, a few years. I've got a couple of people in the UK, I have a couple in Israel, and learning, how to kind of give away my money, and it's fascinating, and it's humbling, and a lot more sort of sobering than the sort of at the end of the day posh world of tech. I would like to think that in 10 years that would be a more lion's share of my time.
Guy, what are you running away from?
I think more than anything, I'm running away from tribalism, from this sort of notion of like, I'm in this group and this group is better. There's elements of that in sort of Israel, and, while the army kind of gave me a bunch of sort of successful starts, I have fairly severe disagreements with how the occupying kind of army in Israel is handling today. It goes to just sort of the way I approach company building and sort of building a London and Tel Aviv office, but making sure where there's never like an us versus them. And even the sort of the core business of Snyk and sort of developers and security and embedding that in it. And so, I worry about the deglobalization process that is happening in the world, but probably, and, even my sort of charitable kind of agenda and all of that, it really focuses on inclusion and on sort of being one, as opposed to being a part of the tribes.
I have to ask this. You mentioned kind of giving away money. How do you think about your relationship to money?
I'm very uncomfortable with it. Look, I like my kind of creature comforts. I like my sort of larger house and posh vacations, and I enjoy those. I like premium, even super premium. I don't like, I really dislike luxury. I really dislike sort of status symbols and wearing something because it is sort of to show that you're doing it. Those are negative value to me. And so I'm learning it. I'm enjoying the ability to help family members, to help friends. And I think those are the things that give me the most pleasure. And eventually it's a bit of a burden, and I talk about sort of giving it away. I think all the money that I have at Sneak, my wife and I were planning to give that away. But when you give away larger amounts of money, suddenly that becomes a burden. It's not donating $50 to sort of UNICEF. And so I think it's a burden I accept. There's moments where I get annoyed with it. And I don't pretend to be sort of, miserable for it. It's first class problems by definition. But I think it's to an extent an effort, not just sort of a joy.
Listen, for larger amounts, we'd be happy to relieve you of it for 20 VC donations. Listen, I've loved doing this. This has been such a broad discussion, but thank you so much. And this has been so much fun, my friend.
Thanks for having me. And, thanks for putting this on. I always enjoy the episodes.